In this gold belt video, I will show how to test a shareable package in Python. I have the project open for testing existing functionality in Python here, so you're welcome to use that to follow along. To get started with, we will need to install the dependencies. It's using a pip file, so whatever tool you'd like, I'm going to use pipenv. Create our shell. And then pipenv, we will do an install. I'm going to go ahead and create a folder for tests. While that's happening, we'll create a new file, test, process subscriptions. And I'm going to install, I'm going to use pytest. So we'll do pipenv install pytest. All right, so we'll say test process subscriptions success. All right, so thinking through this, what we're looking for in a package, in a shareable package, we're looking for the entry point. Unlike runnable applications like a console app or rich client app, there's not going to be a main method. Also, unlike a web app or web service, there's not going to be specific endpoints that I can call. So instead, what I have to do is I have to explore the class library or the shareable package to find out how to call into this thing. What are the main types that represent the entry point for this particular class library? Python does not make that easy. There are a couple of things we can look at, but in general, you're going to do a lot more spelunking in Python than you generally do in other languages. So Python, one of the first things for which I'd look is an init file. So there's no init file in the root, so that's not helping us out. The init file, the reason I'm looking for that, oftentimes the init file will include very specific initialization that includes the types that we want to make available, that we want to elevate up or expose out as the root of this particular package or this particular module. So that's the first thing for which I look. I don't see one in the root, so we're not looking there. So let's look in main. There is an init file here, so let's take a look, and it is empty. So sadly, this is also not helping us out. But that's what might be in the init file is any code that would say, okay, here are the types, or here's the initialization routines for this particular module. Here's things we want to set up, lots of different things. One of those things would be types. Since we don't have it, I have to look at the specific modules in this folder, in this package, to see if I can find out what the entry point is. So noticing that this is the subscription billing project and there's a subscription billing module, that seems promising. Also looking at credit cards and data, those seem like subdomains. It seems like credit cards would be used when we're doing the billing. Data would be used when we're connecting to the database. So I'm going to just guess. Now, I don't know that, so I may have to open those up and look, but I'm going to guess that those are probably not the modules in question. Subscription billing feels like a better place to start. So let's start with that. Again, you're using your judgment. Is there a name that pops out that says, oh, this seems promising? Open that up and just start exploring. So looking at this, we've got our imports up at the top, and then we have so we've got a class remittance customer. We've got a function create remittance customer. We've got a class watchdog processor. We've got a function process subscriptions. So those are the four different things that we've got. So two classes and two functions. Let's take a look at those, see if we can rule those out. So first off, remittance customer does have a constructor that takes quite a few different arguments here. That feels complex. That feels like not what I'm really looking for. It's good to know that I can do that, but that doesn't seem simple enough for the entry point. So I'm going to ignore that one for now. Knowing that it's there, we can come back to it later. We've got instance properties. I don't see anything static on this particular, there's no static method on this particular class. So the only way to create a remittance customer would be through the constructor. So I'm going to hope that's not the entry point. Looking at create remittance customer, this takes a record. I don't know what record is. So I'm going to guess that this is an internal method used as a part of this particular module. So again, it's good to know that this is a method I could call, that I could give it a record, and it'll give us a remittance customer. So that definitely seems tied together. Taking a single record seems more simplified, but I don't know what record is. So again, I'm going to hope that this is not the entry point. If it is, we're going to have to do some experimentation, see if we can figure out what that means. Watchdog processor. Now the name seems promising since we're dealing with watchdog subscriptions. So this feels promising. Looking at the constructor, it requires a couple of dates and it requires a list of remittance customers. Well, that's that class that we had up above. So I'd have to create a bunch of those and then pass it to this thing. Okay, so I'm starting to figure out a flow on how we might be able to do this, but again, it feels really complicated. I'd have to either create a bunch of these using the constructor or create a bunch of these using this method and then pass it to the watchdog processor constructor. So I could do that. I'm hoping that's not the case. Looking for the rest of this, I don't see any static methods. So really the only way to create one of these watchdog processors is through the constructor. So I either have constructors or I have static methods or I have root level methods. So on classes, constructors are static methods. So that's just a constructor. The last method that we've got, the last function, is process subscriptions. This takes an optional date time and an optional date time and returns a watchdog processor. Now that feels about right. So I don't necessarily need to pass a start date and an end date. I could just call this method, or I could give it two simple dates. Dates aren't that big a deal. So creating dates, not that big a deal in terms of testing. This feels about right. So this process subscriptions, we can look at the code and see that it really is doing what we want. But just looking at the signature on line 72, this feels promising. So it takes two optional dates, and then it'll give us back a watchdog processor. So this is the method that I'm going to try for our test. So we'll go to our test, and we'll say my processor equals process subscriptions, and we'll just pass nothing. So we are going to need our import in. So from, let's see, main.subscription billing, we want to import process subscriptions. That will give us back our watchdog processor. And now from here, I've got my successful remittance customers over which I can assert, and I've got my error remittance customers over which I can assert. That basically sets everything up. So at this point, I've figured out how to test the class library or the shareable package. So again, just to review, the first thing for which I want to look in Python is there an init file? If there is, that can sometimes give me some examples or a clue into what are the main types that I want to be using as a part of my code. What do I want to be importing? Otherwise, we're spelunking. So again, we're looking for a class with a constructor. And is it a simple constructor? A class with a static method, and these don't have static methods. Or root level functions, global functions that we can call. And it turns out in this case, it's a global function.